Yes.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to another episode of the FreudenFreude weekly live stream, where we bring you content to help you grow and develop as a person and as a leader.
Sandra Corona.
And I'm Claudia. We are coaches. Yes, we are. We are coaches. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yes, so I am a coach for executives, for young professionals, and for the neurodiverse community.
There you go. Sounded good this week. And I work with corporate leaders, entrepreneurs, as well as their teams in tech and beyond. So today we are revisiting an old faithful topic, and that is the whole react versus respond. Why do you think, Sandra, if I can put you on the spot here, why this topic belongs in our resilience series?
That we have been talking about a lot is about how to control your emotions and how to manage your what would that be called? How to manage what you feel, your reactions, your behavior, your response, right? Because sometimes some of us are kind of visceral. That's what we call it. Visceral means that you're usually just feels it, like when you feel that pain, like that urge, that thing that you want to respond, it's not in your heart and it's not in your brain, it's in your gut. That's where it is. And that's where most of the people that you see that behave a little bit not in control of themselves, that's where they're letting their reaction, their behavior come from. But when you have the ability to think what is actually happening, when you can control your emotions, when you can analyze what is happening at that moment, then you can start making better decisions for yourself.
Yeah, interesting. The thing is, in times where resilience is needed, those are times when we have a bit more of an emotional charge to begin with. We might be facing failure, the stakes might be high, we might be feeling unsure of ourselves and so on. And that is when our primitive brain is really, really engaged. And so from a neurocognitive perspective, we are then kind of in this moment where the body goes into this mode of flight or fright or freeze, right? That flight or fight mechanism. And the only way that we can control this biological way of reacting, this emotional way or this gut way of reacting, or one could call it primitive, I guess, is if we go and we think. Because in these flight or fright or freeze kind of reactions, what's not happening is that we are actually thinking. And so in order to think, thinking takes time, folks. I mean, often these things just ping into our heads ready-made, but if we want to be purposeful about it, we need time to think. It doesn't need to be much. Oftentimes just stopping for 2-3 seconds and kind of let it percolate up into our neurofrontal cortex is enough already to be more thoughtful about it. Really, that's the word, thoughtful. And so I think that this respond versus react has definitely a place in a series on resilience. Just on a very small side note, Sandra, if you could bring down your microphone level just a tiny little bit, there's a lot of background noise. Or go into your Zoom settings and dial up the background noise filtering just a little bit. Because as we do in our attempts to serve you guys better, we are constantly tickling with the tech, and sometimes things like this just happen. Okay,
Can you
so
hear better?
fantastic. Growing pains, growing pains. Fantastic. So maybe at this point it would be wise, because not everybody is familiar with the terminology, to really explain what the difference is between responding and reacting. Would you maybe do that for us, Sandra?
Yeah. So when we respond, we have gone through the entire process of analyzing and understanding our feelings. When we have the ability to first understand what we're feeling, we're able to go through the emotion and understand whether it's an old trigger, whether it's a belief, whether it's some kind of value. And then we can make the best decision as to how we're going to respond. Because obviously, clearly, your body is asking you for something. And it's always this, this yanking feeling that you have, where you know that something has to happen. You just don't know yet what has to happen. And so when you do that, when you have the ability to say, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm just only upset. Is it me feeling upset, or is it me being upset? Is this person making me upset, or am I allowing it to make me upset? Keep in mind that there's a lot of meditation and practice that has to go through us telling you, you have to control yourself, you have to manage yourself. It's the ability of this. I know that for a lot of people, it's like, yes, if I knew how to do it, I wouldn't be here. There's quite a lot of work that has to go through, and it takes time. Do not fight it. And what I mean, do not fight it, is a lot of people say, it takes time, it's too much time. When am I going to feel the difference? You started last week. It's going to take time.
Yeah, on the other hand, I think that there's nevertheless, sorry if I contradict you a little bit here, but I think that there's a large, or there's a contingent in the population that just understanding the difference between react and respond is going to raise their awareness and have them respond differently without going through elaborate practice routines and meditation routines and things like that. I really think that it depends on where you're at in your self-knowledge, in your ability to tune into your awareness and your triggers and monitor that. So, it's not always that tricky, because I, for instance, I'm not a big meditator. I'm a big talker. I process through talking. But, different people have different ways of doing this. Okay, so just experiment. And if you run out of ideas, talk to your coach about it. So here, just a little mnemonic on how you can maybe remember this react word versus this respond word. In the react word, there's this reaction, literally like in physics. There's a force that comes, some external trigger, and you react just by magic, just because it's a force of nature. It's this knee-jerk reaction that just happens. Okay, something comes, it pushes you, and you get just blown into smithereens, essentially. In the word respond is the word responding or response. And that, for me at least, indicates that there was a question. There was this moment where you ask yourself the question, what's really going on here, and how do I want to deal with this? And just asking that question is essentially all it takes. What's happening here? And just that moment that you ask a question like that is formed into words, right? Because it's language. We're at a level of our thinking and our brain working that is at the level of language. What's happening here? That is enough to be in response mode, because whatever you do after Whether you're aware or not of this thinking that went on in your neofrontal cortex, it is happening. It might be to some level subconscious. And the more you can really weigh the pros and cons and really go through your usual kind of thinking patterns, the better. But just asking the question very often is already enough. And because your brain's very quickly going to make a determination that, oh, that question is something I need to stop. And the whole machinery is just going to stop. And wherever you are and whatever you're doing, your brain is going to find those 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 seconds to think about it. And if the brain already in its internal model sees that this is kind of okay to just go the default way, the shortcut way, then that already is kind of enough of a stop already. But responding, you do after you ask the question, okay? Because I know that a lot of folks out there, when we have these discussions, often don't, oh, am I reacting now? Am I responding? But that's kind of the way that you can remember that. So do you have maybe an example that you could share, maybe an anecdote, Sandra, about the difference?
Yeah. Example.
Okay.
You can't hear me?
You dropped out for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. So we know that children, adults, and more seasonal people are not going to respond the same way, right? We know that children are still learning and experiencing and trying to understand their emotions. So this is the best time for parents to work with their children, to go through the emotions, right? And so I can tell you an example of when I was little. I was a fighter on the playground, but I wasn't that way. I was made to do that. And that was because it's a survival instinct, right? In children, it's an instinct. So what we try to do as we grow up is to try to remove that instinct, right, from our behavior and try to react more with our brains, right? So I can tell you that, for example, when I was little, bullying was my pet peeve. Like, I just could not see anybody being bullied or anybody messing with me, nobody messing with me. And I would immediately react with a closed fist, a kick in you-know-where to boys. And with girls, it was the hair, it was wherever I can get a hold of. It was not a good thing, really. And the problem when you're growing up, when either your parents are not around because they're working, they're doing these kind of things, they're, doing what they have to do as parents for surviving. When you don't have an adult present that's going to help you how to manage those emotions, you kind of start growing with that, and it stays with you, right? Instead of talking with your parents, instead of talking with an adult, you would say, well, wasn't there a principal to help you? Well, the principal actually was my neighbor. She called me to get all those emotions out because she knew who these kids were. But if that adult would have sat with me and she would have talked to me about what was going on, maybe, just maybe, I would have grown out of those instincts, right? But instead, they stayed with me through my adulthood. And so what happens when you have a person that is not able to respond versus react, that behavior stays with that person throughout their almost lifetime until they realize what has been going on, what is the reason why they behave this way. And I had to dig into my emotions and dig into my past and my memories to understand, why was I always feeling so impulsive? Why was I always so reactive? Why was I always this person that was always telling people what to do versus asking what to do, right? I was just a person that was not in control of her emotions. That's what it was. And once I started working on myself, which is what I would love for people to experience, is that you realize that you are now an adult. You're now in control. Nobody can harm you unless you allow them to harm you, right? You are now an individual who is no longer fighting for survival, for school survival. Am I going to say that it would have been nice not to be bullied? Maybe, but it would have not made me the person that I am today. I find it that there's a reason for people that have to learn how to defend themselves, how to fend for themselves, versus removing everything from them so that nothing bothers them, right?
And of course, this does not mean that you endorse bullying as a
Absolutely
way
not. Absolutely not.
of allowing the bullyee, the poor victim, to be, to learn the lesson.
No,
That
no,
is
no.
not the intention. I just wanted to clarify it. Okay.
Because that's the difference between being somebody that would come home alone and not be able to talk through their emotions, through their feelings, versus getting all of those emotions out in the playground. And that is terrible, because you grow with that. You become an without self-control. And so that is why I say it is not good to not defend yourself, but it's also not good to have to defend yourself in order to survive, right? So there has to be a healthy measure where you learn how to respond, because in that environment and what you're experiencing, you learn to set other boundaries. You learn your values, you learn your beliefs, you learn everything that needs to happen in order for you to become a better adult. So no, bullying is not good. I don't endorse it. And I don't want anybody ever to feel what it is, because I cannot tell you how many times, Claudia, my mom would be like, oh my God, you broke your dress. Yeah, what did you do? And oh God, it was just really bad. But yeah, and then growing up, that is where I am right now, understanding myself. But if I would have had somebody to guide me, which is what a lot of young professionals have now at their reach, to reach out to a coach, they would have the opportunity to go through those emotions, understand themselves, and have and use the techniques that you and I have learned, Claudia, throughout this process of becoming coaches, to help other people deal with situations of responding versus reacting.
Yeah. Because you touched on something here that's quite important, is that a lot of these things are kind of practiced when you are a kid, depending on your situation and things like that. Unfortunately, by default, a lot of adults continue this behavior even though they have grown up, and then they bring these behaviors into their relationships, into their social life, and into the workplace. And woe the poor leader who has some of those people on their team that just have this hairline trigger, and it's really quite disruptive, and ultimately it also stalls the progress in the professional life of these people, because they're never going to go anywhere unless they get themselves under control. And so the if no, yes, people should get a coach. Everybody should have a coach. That's kind of the mantra, and based on our experience, not just because, we're kind of biased on the thing, but because of, what we experience on a day-to-day basis. I have not ever met somebody who said coaching was a waste of time if they have been coached by a competent coach, that is. It's this whole sense of mindfulness. I want to touch on that. Awareness and mindfulness for me kind of go together, because you mentioned a lot of times the word emotion. In my experience, there's a lot of people that react without even being aware that they are being emotional. The reaction is so instantaneous, and they have such low self-awareness that they haven't even been able to realize that there was this emotion bubbling under the surface, that there was this volcano getting ready to erupt that now just needed this trigger to just blow up, right? And sometimes it's also not even an emotion. Sometimes it's just, under double quotes, stress. There might be just overload. You might be tired. You might be hungry or hangry.
Yes.
Right. And so, your hormones might be out of whack. Whatever it is, there is something there that has you very often in this state that is already kind of fragile or volatile. And in moments like that, I find that it's quite easy for, to get tripped up by these yet more external events. And it's not a linear kind of thing, I think. You can plod along just fine with that same level of stress or emotional overload. You can plod around just fine, and then all of a sudden you can't. You don't necessarily see it coming when your willpower is depleted, or when it just reaches that tipping point. Again, we are not here to judge. Okay, this happens to everybody. It's a normal thing, in my view. I'm not judging that. That doesn't make you a bad person or something. It's just that in that particular instance, you might not have had the right coping mechanism to deal with it. So in terms of awareness and mindfulness, if we were more adept to be self-aware, which for me is kind of this constant state. I kind of know how I'm feeling, where I'm at. Yeah. Other moments are just checking in. If you need a reminder to check in, then you can set yourself reminders, and it can be like really weird stuff, like every time you go to the bathroom.
Okay.
Every time you eat a snack, every time a notification goes off on your phone, or whatever it is that reminds you to maybe check in with yourself, doing it and practicing kind of this sense of like, am I okay? Am I relaxed? What is happening here? Am I getting worked up? Am I getting hangry, tired, stressed? Am I starting to really get aggravated by this jerk that's on my team? Yeah. Just keep in touch with what's happening in you, even before a situation occurs, or in anticipation of a situation potentially occurring that might be a react versus response kind of dilemma.
You was thinking, Claudia, is that another way that people can realize where they are and what's happening is that reactive is living in the past. Because the moment that you react, it's because you're letting something from the past come to your present, and make you behave the way that you're going or you're about to behave, which could be, whatever instinct that is. Fair to say animalistic? I don't think so, because a lot of animals are better than us, but just that impulse, that impulsivity, right? So, so reacting is living in the past, right? And so remind me, we're being reactive versus responding. So responding is being in the present. It's letting go of everything that has ever bothered you in the past. Or if it comes back at that moment, it's being able to say, no, I'm no longer that little girl, or I'm no longer that person. That was a long time ago. I'm now in control of myself. Nobody tells me what to do, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you need to tell yourself to remind yourself you are in control of yourself at this very moment. Yeah, that is the present.
Just to clarify, this work of letting go of the past and kind of making conscious decisions about who you want to be in the present and things like that, that is a work in progress. That is not work that happens in that microsecond.
Exactly.
Between the trigger and the reaction, or the trigger, right? This is kind of the ongoing work. If you want to become more even about these things and more I'm searching for the word, just being able to cope and letting it go, that these things do not work you up as much anymore than they used to, then you can do this kind of work. And we do that a lot with people as coaches, that they have certain things that just don't benefit them anymore in their adult lives. And they need some help to deal with it, to diffuse it. That's maybe a good word, to diffuse it, that you can kind of just let it go and deal with it a little bit differently. And very often those things actually just require a mindset shift, a different perspective. This is not therapy, people. We are not talking here that, some of these breakthroughs that you need are akin to like 2 years of therapy and talking it out and rehashing. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about coaching here, making decisions, becoming clear about what is what, about where you want to go, about how to get there, about practicing that and integrating it into your everyday life. So yeah, if you have these kind of things, especially if there's patterns that you see, that whenever something like that happens, you react, and that has maybe unfavorable consequences, then that is something you can very targetedly work on. Very well said.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the react versus respond. Some of it, let me give you an example. I had recently the chance of, as part of a local club, to be part of an event. And as we were wrapping up the event, it was big things. We had to put stuff away. And we were kind of in cramped quarters. There were quite a number of us. And I was there trying to be helpful, moving things from boxes and putting things in boxes and all that kind of stuff. And I went there and I started opening the lids of boxes to be able to hand them to the next person in kind of the chain. And here was this member of this organization, this club, that pushed me out of the way, and went and got a box and opened the lid herself and just went back and did her thing. And I'm like, okay, so that wasn't all that nice, because I really don't know that person that well, right? And then, a couple minutes later, she comes again and literally physically pushes me out of the way. Not excuse me, no, let me pass through here, no, nothing, just literally pushes me out of the way. So Did I feel a reaction to that? Yes,
You
I
did.
did.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
In no uncertain terms did I feel a reaction to that.
Yeah.
However, I mean, I was like, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but see, what happened after also applies, because this was a reaction and I felt it, but at the very least, I was aware of this reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I could make a choice to consciously, rather than knee-jerkingly, decide how to respond. Because if I didn't like kind of realize that I was being really aggravated by this, I would have been in her face. I'm not the like, you know, kind of like your reaction to these things. Right? But I mean, I could have stood my ground, you know,
Yeah.
obviously. I'm like, what are you doing? You know, who do you think?
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, I could have gone that road, but then
Yep.
I thought, like, she must have her reasons. That was my thing. She must have her reasons. You know, maybe she doesn't like me, and that's okay. She doesn't need to like me. Maybe I really was in her way. Really, maybe I was in her way. I might not see it. Might be a blind spot of mine. You know, maybe me being there, opening these boxes might not be the best use of my help at this moment in this cramped space and stuff like that. And, you know, is it even worth making a fuss about? Yeah. So in a split second, it's like all these kind of things. And I just said, okay. And I closed the box, put it back in the bigger box, and went and did something else to help out. That was my response.
I still have problems with that.
Even though, no, it's not, it really wasn't worth it to me. It really wasn't worth it to me to make a big drama. We just had a nice day. We knew we were going to all, like the club was going to go out to have dinner that evening and things like I didn't want to make drama. It's too much effort. It wasn't worth it.
There you go. You thought about the consequences of your actions. That's the
Exactly.
clue.
I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. You know, she did that, you know, that's her thing. I don't need to provide her a button to push that's bigger than the one she did push. It was just a thing. So even though within myself, I had this reaction, I was like, what? She did what? You know, nevertheless, I was like, you know what? Not worth it. Not worth it. She might have, you know,
Exactly.
in her world, this might make sense. I don't know what's going on in her. It's not worth it. I don't want the drama. And then I responded that way. So I tell the story to say that there's nothing wrong with having a reaction. You're gonna have a reaction.
Correct.
Either way, the reaction is there. It's just how much do you allow that reaction to dictate what's happening? Of course, if you touch a hot stove with your hand, you're gonna pull it away. That reaction is to the point. It should be, you know, that's not the moment to keep your finger on the hot stove and say like, how should I respond? Right? I mean, that's, you know, instant, obviously. But when we talk communication, interpersonal relationships, how we show up or react to a perceived or real threat at work or whatever, you know, you have usually the split second to assess a little bit deeper, because this whole thing in my head, even though I talked about it for 2 minutes, it took all of like 2 seconds.
Right. But it's because, sorry to interrupt you, I think it's because, like you said it before, it is the fact that you thought about the consequences and how it would affect you, your husband, your the perception that people have about you, regardless of whether they know you well or not. You know, we think about everything, and you decided it's not worth it. And for some people, I think it comes to a point where they say, and it's a cultural thing. I think that's the secret as well. It's a cultural thing. In certain cultures, you not responding is bad. That means that you are easily manipulated or managed, or they can pushed around. That's the word. Versus, you know, saying, "Oh, don't mess with this person," right? I mean, I understand you. And even when you told me that story, I was like, oh my God, you know, because it takes a lot to not respond.
Because the thing is, I could have decided to respond by confronting this person. Absolutely. I'm not saying that my way of dealing in this one very specific particular situation was the right way. It was just an example of a response versus a reaction.
It was a way.
I could just have gone to her and talked to her, and whether in front of everybody or separately, I could have addressed it. Right? It was just not worth it to me at that moment, and I didn't want to disrupt the flow of everybody and the atmosphere that we had, right? So, and you know, people know I'm not that easily pushed around, I guess. And it has to do with self-confidence, and that you're just secure in who you are, and that these things don't disturb you all that much. Correct. Right? Would you say that often, I don't want to generalize, but it's often immature people that have a tendency to more easily react versus respond? What would you say to that?
I wouldn't say it's immature. I would say it's a matter of inability to comprehend the situation, right? Because this is where I was going with the cultural thing. Culturally, there's certain nationalities that if you react, you're doing the right thing, right? For me, I believe when people have a reaction, okay, I have to say it's half and half, Claudia, because when people are misinformed or don't do the research, don't do their homework, depending on where they are, right? Say you're in the university and college, and you haven't researched something about, I don't know, philosophy, life, history, whatever, something that they can tell you, the trigger is going to be based on your past, but it's going to be based on you. Let's say maybe your parents were always telling you, you never know anything, you don't know anything, but you were always reading and you were always making yourself informed and everything else. But it sticked with you the fact that you don't understand, that you don't know how to understand things. In your present, what happens is that you believe that you actually don't understand things, although you have the knowledge, but because you cannot verbally express what you're trying to communicate to the other side that you feel is being aggressive towards you, your response is with your body, with your fist, putting your body versus your mind, because this cannot articulate with this. So the only way that you know how to do is put this in front of people, right? So I think it's a matter of what you have experienced in your life. What is that moment? But yes, I think it has to do with 50-50. There's a lot of days that we see that are reactive because they don't know the answer to things.
Yeah, and I think it also maybe depends on the underlying raw emotion that's underneath it, whether it is, sorry. Oh, I guess my husband came home and is putting the things down. I just heard a noise through this. Sorry about that. If you have cats that are destroying your apartment, whenever you hear something, you're like, what's happening? In any case, I think it depends also what the raw emotion, whether you realize it, whether you're aware of it or not, is. You might very well deal very nicely with things like, for instance, this anecdote that I just talked about. If somebody were to come and hit me in the face, my hand would be in their face before I would realize it, right?
Exactly.
So it really depends on the trigger, or about your what you tolerate and what you don't tolerate. I think that there's degrees to this. Also, I think that very often these things can have to do with fear. Very often that is one of the underlying drivers. It's fear. And often we have people that become very aggressive because they're fearful
that somebody's going to see who their true selves. Yeah.
Right. It's like the dog that barks and growls because it's actually pushed into a corner and fearful. Right. So and again, that touches on this fight or flight that we touched on before. So not everything and every reaction response cycle is as civilized as the anecdote that I was just talking about. Sometimes it's much more primal than that. And but nevertheless, there are things that we can do on a general life level and in the moment to maybe diminish that a little bit, because very often when reason and our cognitive abilities are taken out of the equation, then we are not in control of our behavior. And if we're not in control of our behavior, then the results can be catastrophic. The results can truly be bad. You can say the bad things to the bad people. You can hurt somebody, whether it be emotionally through words or physically. You can just be labeled a jerk or a guy with anger management. People might sue you and take you to court. You never know what can transpire. So the moment reason is taken out and you only react without responding it, then it's you might be in a world of trouble. So the more we can kind of raise this awareness that we're coming close to this boiling point, and that we become aware maybe that we have certain triggers that we have to watch out for, like, oh, they're talking about this topic that is this trigger for me. I see it coming from a mile away. I better tighten the reins on myself a little bit and maybe remove myself from the discussion or whatever. Those are also things to protect yourself and a coping mechanism to manage this. There's always going to be things that are fully unexpected that you cannot prepare for, and that's just how it is. And you can analyze it later and do some work after in order to maybe, remedy the situation or grow in your own personality and your own mindset regarding that. So use it as a learning outcome. And just continue working on this, because I really feel this is such a big part of resilience. And the skills that you learn in one area of your life in terms of this react versus respond. You might first practice this in your relationship, or you might first practice this in the workplace. It depends what might be more acute for you. And then as you gain these general skills of just stopping and asking the question that then will lead to a response, that is going to become your default behavior. And then even though you started it at work, it's going to be in the social life, in the personal realm, and in your relationships, and so on. And so it's a parallelly deployable skill.
I think that if people would want to practice, let's say, to say, how can I practice this? How can I say, this is my trigger? Let's say that their triggers are people that talk about politics. Politics is everything, right? It can either, you can be in agreement or not, absolutely, or not at all with a certain political party. Well, the thing is, what I do when I am feeling triggered about something and I try to understand it, I watch YouTube videos. I watch YouTube videos on that topic in particular. And I watch the people behave. And then that people don't behave that way because they want to. They also have triggers like me, but people don't listen to each other anymore. And that is what I've noticed, that people start being reactive versus listening, versus thinking, versus choosing, right, whether to stay or to go. You cannot most of the times run from a encounter with a person that is in opposite belief as you. Let's say in the airport, you cannot avoid it. If there's somebody sitting next to you and they're probably on the phone and they're talking about something that immediately you feel that they're, that they're pulling you from God knows where, that hurts you the most. And what I have done many times is to look at the person and say, how much do I know about this person? I know nothing. For all I know, this person had a really rough life, or this person had a really hard time trying to make their money, and they're protecting it. And these are their values, and these are their beliefs. And then I with myself, because once again, we invite always people to write down what are their triggers, their beliefs, their values. Where are they standing in certain views? Where are they living in the past, in the present? Where do they want to go? So all of this helps people understand themselves when they're confronted with somebody in a space where you cannot avoid listening to somebody say something that is eventually going to trigger you. Here's the thing. Remember, something that triggers you is because you're letting it trigger you. And I know it's easy, so easy to say, or you're letting it trigger you. You're letting it. No, I know it's so easy to say, but that's the truth. You have two choices. You either come to terms that that person is not talking to you, but if they are, what's the difference? Okay, there's no difference. Their ideas are not going to change. You're not there to change anybody. You can check one of our videos. We're talking about, can you change people? No, you cannot change people. And you don't change people by talking with them, by having a 5-minute conversation with them at the airport or on the plane. You cannot do that. You're not there. You're not here in this life to change anybody's ideas or ideals. That is not your job. Your job is to manage yourself.
Very well said, because all and the only thing you can control is your attitude and your effort. Yeah. I will need to be excused. Sorry, this is live, but we
Yeah,
have a hailstorm. I need to check the window in my
sure.
bathroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
I'll be here.
That's the noise you're hearing. You're under a roof window here. I'll
Oh
be
my
right back.
Lord. Sure, Claudia. So, anyways, one of the other things that you want to understand is that visceral emotions are never going to come, like Claudia was saying, they're not coming from a place where you can stop and analyze that you're feeling something. They're just something that tells you, I have to do this. I have to be reactive. I have to respond, like defending a sister, a cousin, a brother, a mother, right? We have to think what we're doing and why we're doing it. So always think that, like what Claudia was saying, that sometimes you don't realize that there's an emotion involved because it's coming from your gut. There's no emotions in your guts. Okay. So always think that when you're having a reactive behavior, when you're impulsive, when you're just feeling like, oh, you hear yourself saying, oh, I'm going to punch this person in the face, say, why? Because they don't think like me. So just a little of advice there on where to see that your feelings or your emotions come normally from.
Fantastic. Well said. A perennial favorite of mine, and all my clients know this one, is just to say, this person is entitled to their opinion and I'm entitled to mine. That little bit of distance between you and them, that, they just do their thing and you do your thing. So many of the things that bother us can then already disappear. Of course, if somebody, steps on your property and does damage and stuff like that, even though that's their opinion, that's not okay to just, be hands off and things like that. So, but overhearing a political discussion and things like that, it's like what you mentioned before. It's like they are entitled to their opinion. It's none of your business, really, and you're entitled to yours.
Correct.
And a lot of those things are just go away. And again, is it really worth making a drama out of it? It's sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And there again, we have this question, is it worth it? And just having a little bit of this distance. And sometimes for me too, it's when I deal with react versus respond, for me, it feels like just a little bit of distance. That between the perception of what comes from the outside and what I put out, there's just a split second, or there's the sense of distance. And that's what I term awareness. That's what I term awareness. There's something there. It needs to go through this filter of awareness before something happens. And it's really quite weird. I'm a kinesthetic person, so for me, it's a feeling. It's it's something in space, and it's a movement and things like that. So other people might have different ways that they represent this hold, maybe, that they can have on themselves. And if you ever studied NLP, there's ways that you can anchor these, or first symbolize these this way of feeling and things like that, and then you can anchor different, more optimal or more appropriate behaviors as you practice them in. Besides the point that is truly tactical, and not necessarily a DIY kind of thing. So respond versus react. I hope that we made the point how it fits into resilience. Again, when you're in a moment that requires resilience, that's exactly when you're already kind of charged and broiled up and things like that. So, this becomes more acute.
Mm-hmm.
If you're having a restful weekend at home, you're less likely to overreact and
Yeah.
explode. If you're in a really, let's say, loud and high stakes discussion at work.
Mm-hmm.
And so what else did you want to add here? We're already at 55 minutes, pretty much. I do not know where the time flies so quickly when we
I
have.
know, right?
It seems to be going faster and faster each week. Like in the beginning, the lives tended to feel so long, and now they're like over in a flash. It's really crazy.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's something that I was telling, that I was saying is while you were doing what you needed to do, is that I tell people that sometimes, yes, sometimes being reactive depends on the situation. And if it's because you're defending a cousin, a brother, a sister, somebody that is, having a bad moment, you have to think, are these words? If they're just words, words are just words. They're nothing. But if there is physical contact, if there's anything else, then I think I don't even need to tell you, right? That everything else, just do what you have to do. But these are times, we're talking about times when words are just words, comments are just comments. So many people, so many young people now that are on TikTok, that are influencers, that make content and all these kind of things. I see how people respond to their videos or to their content, and it's so aggressive, and you see people responding to it, and everybody feels like they need to defend the person, when I see that the person, the content creator, never bothers, or the content creator is so damaged by those comments that crazy things have happened to them, that they've gone so far as to harming themselves, and some consequences have been fatal. So this is what we're trying to do in a world where there is so much emotion not being managed, right? Right now, we're living in a world where emotions are just crazy. They're wild. They're everywhere. We would like for people to think about that words are just words. The same thing that my father would say, well, why were you defending your mother? And I would say, well, because they were calling my mother this and this. And he would ask and say, well, is she? And then you think about it, and you're like, no. Then what were you fighting for? That realize that behaviors and reactiveness and responding and reactiveness is not the same. They are not the same. One involves emotions and it's in the past, and the other one is the intention to be in the present and listening. That's what I wanted to say, Claudia. How about yourself?
Well, I would just say stop and think. That's my summary for this thing. Just like, be aware something is happening, stop and think. And again, it is possible that for some people, this is something very entrenched, and you might need the help of a coach or a therapist, for that matter, to maybe untangle some of these things. So if you find that you have patterns that reappear constantly, the same triggers leading you down a very reactive way that then damages your reputation or your relationships and things like that, do something about it. It is not cast in stone. It definitely isn't. There a lot can be done. And so I think that if it's okay with you, we would conclude it at that.
It's perfect. I loved it. Thank you so much, Claudia.
So if you have anything in particular to share about this topic, please put it down in the comments. Otherwise, if you like the content that we put out, please show us some love, subscribe to the channel, hit the like, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content. And we greatly would appreciate any kind of engagement. So we will be back with another topic 1 week from today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Sandra, for a great discussion. I really had fun. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Good night, Claudia.